So welcome everyone to the show. Today I'm with Don. Don, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Yeah, I'm the co-founder and CTO of Searchcraft.
So what does Searchcraft do? And would you like to give about what they do in details? What motivated you to be the CTO and what kind of problems they're trying to solve?
Sure. So, Searchcraft makes a tool in the developer space. It's for search infrastructure and tooling. My previous background comes from being running engineering teams at a software consultancy where we build software for startups mostly. And during those build outs, we often would come across we'd have to add search to an application and kind of felt like the tools on the market were very difficult. They've been around for a long time. They're kind of difficult to use. The developer experience was not great. And a lot of times handing off that search infrastructure was a challenge, especially if you're working with smaller teams that maybe don't have a whole lot of backend expertise or don't have training in these tools. So we made us think that, there could be a way to kind of reduce the complexity of having enterprise quality search and to improve that developer experience.
So what does Searchcraft provide that stands apart from, let's say, the big players in search? So stuff like Elasticsearch, OpenSearch, which is a fork of Elastic, Algolia, and many others.
Yeah, those are all great. They're all well-made tools. For Elastic and OpenSearch, they're essentially the same thing. They're both based off of Lucene, and the Lucene library's been around for a long time. It's kind of showing its age. They both require specialized training to know how to configure and to tune it, and they use a lot of resources to run. So if you're running your own search cluster, that could be a concern. Searchcraft uses about 40% less hardware to run than Elastic. Algolia, it's also a great tool, but the main detraction with Algolia is it's very expensive to run and it's SaaS only. So if you have requirements where your platform has to be installable for like distribution purposes, or if you want to run everything on your own hosting, then Algolia is kind of like not an option. It's also why we offer our downloadable version.
Tried actually doing OpenSearch and Elasticsearch before, and it was hell. Trust me, it was
uh,
absolute hell.
we hear that from a lot from people.
Yeah, it's like I wanted to add a authorizer to a very big index, and then all of a sudden the entire thing went down because the authorizer that I've put is incompatible with what I'm trying to search for, and we have to go down for a very long time. I was like, that's very interesting. It's not supposed to act this way at all.
Yeah.
But Searchcraft is closed source. But you do provide like a downloadable Docker image for local use, and there's a licensing model for production. Plus, you have a cloud offering as well. Why would you choose a model that I would have to host it on my own server and try it out instead of, let's say, give a free tier on your cloud service? And is there any difference, let's say, running it on my machine and running it on my server versus running it on your cloud service?
Okay. Yeah, I can clarify it a little bit. So we do actually offer both, and I can explain that. So for cloud, we do have a free plan, and that free plan is fully featured. The only difference between the free and the paid cloud plan is the amount of documents you get and the request per month kind of thing. So there is some limitations on that. And for the easiest route for most people is to use Searchcraft with our Searchcraft cloud plan. But however, some companies do have a requirement where they need to be able to host their own search infrastructure for themselves for like data security issues or for distribution of their own platform. And that's kind of why we offer the downloadable version, right? Like if you're government or maybe you're in health tech, you might want to host it yourself. But it's there for both people. And I would steer people towards the free cloud if they just want to get up and running quickly.
But if I can run this Docker image, which I can run this on any server that I want, what is the challenge of, let's say, I running it on production without getting a license to you? Like, is there a mechanism that handles this within it, or is it like trust with the user? Like, this person is like, okay, I'm using this, I'm benefiting. Maybe I can just buy the license so that I can
Hmm.
support these people. What's your thoughts on this?
I mean, it's trust, right? It's about building trust and relationships with people using our platform. I also think if you're an organization and you're serious about your product, you're probably going to want a support agreement, especially if you're like, you know, a large enterprise organization. For a startup, maybe there's less of a concern if you don't have any. Hey, you're still building up your user base. Maybe you don't have a lot of revenue. Then maybe that's a different conversation. But we're very open to working with organizations and kind of like figuring out what type of agreement is the best for their situation. But we're also not. We're It's more about having those relationships with people building on our platform. So yeah, we don't like. There's no mechanism to like say you have to. If you turn it on in prod, you have to have the license right away, right? So it's trust.
Yeah, because I remember even there's some solutions that would like, if you run it on production, it will start to like after a certain period, it's start telling you like, hey, this is running on like a production environment. We've seen this in like some enterprise. They offer like, let's say, an open source or somewhat of an open source solution, and they tell you like, hey, this is not operable, get a like a production license or something like that. So
Hmm.
I- I'm kind of impressed by the fact that you went with the whole like, okay, we trust the person. It's like on good intuition, they'll come up to you and tell you like, hey, we've been running this and we want your support on this. So, but the support that they kind of get when they're running it on their own servers is different than, let's say, the cloud offering, or is it almost the same?
Well, I mean, so we know our system very well, so we know kind of like the optimal setup for the back end. But there's no reason why anyone can't just run it themselves. And we don't. It is the exact same version that we use, though. I don't do a different build for our Docker image. So
Now we're starting to see with recent like AI reshaping how we search and interact with data, especially let's say now with the rise of like small startups building stuff on AI and start building through, we start seeing stuff like beddings, vector databases, and semantic search. Even some people start doing MCP servers so they can communicate their agents together. Where does Searchcraft fits into that picture, and how do you see AI changing the role of traditional search engines, especially now we're searching things a bit different than we used to do before?
yeah, it's been a big disruption, and it's kind of brought back interest in search as a technology. I would say, oh, it was search was kind of a thing that people didn't think about that much a few years ago, and now people are kind of rethinking that approach again. Partially because like the interface is very similar, right? Like you're entering something, a question into a search input, right? But the form of that query is probably different now. There's more and more people asking for details with where there needs to be some kind of semantic reasoning around a question versus like just a single keyword kind of thing. I think vector embeddings were kind of like that was a stepping stone between just the simplistic keyword search and then questions. And then now we're with AI, I would say these language models have a greater understanding of user intention. How we fit in is we're always just, I like to say we're like the data retrieval layer. We're the way to get data out of one system to another in the fastest and most relevant fashion. So we're kind of like this middle layer between maybe an AI layer and your source data. Knowing how to communicate with those AI systems, we have an MCP server that people can use when developing locally. And if they're working locally with an LLM to write code, they can use our MCP server to actually build their application and structure those queries. So I have a couple of like demo videos about that. For ourselves, we have like a semantic reasoning layer with the language model, but we don't prescribe like a specific model. Anyone can kind of plug in their own model as the kind of like the user facing semantic layer, and then that can talk to our APIs.
But now you're when developing Searchcraft and all of those things, you prioritize the idea of having a developer experience more than just doing it for profit and long-term strategy. So some companies don't have this ideology of like, let's say I want to run an MCP server to make my service better. I would just assume somebody else would start developing this and they move on with it. But what made you think that having a better developer experience is better for the long term? And how do you approach this kind of balance?
Yeah, I mean, if you're making developer tools, and that's what I would classify Searchcraft under that banner as a developer tool, then the experience is very important. It's one of the pillars of kind of how we approach building things, building features when we work on Searchcraft. Everything goes towards reducing the complexity of how to use it and making it easier to use. So, and we want to enable builders kind of all levels. Like you could have the senior people who know Search very well, and they want to be able to configure things in a very specific way. So those levers are there for people who know how to use them. But we also want to make the ground level experience easy enough where people can get up and running, just in a few minutes or a few hours without having to like go through special training or have to watch like hours of videos to learn how to use it. I think if developers they find a tool easier to use, they're going to pick our option versus somebody else, right? And that's what motivates us.
I remember when I was like starting out to learn how to do code and start to use kind of like some services, you never get the idea of what you want to do. Like, okay, why do I want to use a database? Okay, I want to use a database because I want to do this. And then why do I need to use a search engine? And most of the time people would say, oh, okay, we can just search on the database directly, until you start getting to a very huge scale and searching becomes extremely hard. Like I can give like an example on this. Imagine if you're trying to search for a bunch of stores and they have, let's say, like some product lines, and try to search that on the database. It will become extremely hard. But for some developer who's starting out, he doesn't know how to pick and put things together, and they might use the wrong tool for the wrong purposes. So you see sometimes people put the entire thing inside, let's say, Elastic, the entire object blob, and they treated it as like, let's say, a MongoDB database, query this, find for me this, and retrieve data. And some of them tried to use it in a more efficient way of like, let's say, putting a bit of metadata and still fetches on the database. What's your thought on this, and what do you recommend people when they want to start out, let's say, they want to see Searchcraft, how would they want to see it?
Yeah, I mean, search is a difficult problem, and I think developers they should focus their efforts on what makes their own product unique, right? So building those features out and building the unique parts of their application. And yes, you can stand up, build your own search infrastructure if you wanted to, but it's like, if you don't do that full time, I really don't recommend it. It's kind of like authentication. You can roll your own authentication, or you can just pull something off the shelf and be done with it. But for people who think about search all day or authentication all day or any of these like kind of like niche specialized solutions, I feel like you're better off taking something off the shelf and just integrating it versus trying to like reinvent the wheel. Yeah, focus on building what makes your product unique, and then, just pull in a tool that is already purpose built for what you're trying to solve. Search is hard.
And I realized that Searchcraft raised angel investment, which you went all in to develop Searchcraft altogether. Can you share what the process was like, whether you recommend fundraising early on, or would you recommend bootstrapping first and then you go towards creating your own company?
It was my first time ever having to raise money. It was very difficult to do. To anyone thinking about founding a company, I would say get as far as you can bootstrap before you raise any money. Like we built Searchcraft for about 2 years on the side on like nights and weekends before we got to the point where we're like, okay, we think this is like something that's there. Now let's try and go all in on it, right? We had enough confidence in it at that point where we decided to do a raise. And the reason we did a raise is because we wanted to be able to do it full time and to be able to go quickly and ship quickly. And like it's hard to do if you're working another full time job, right? So, but it was my first time doing a raise, and I had never written a pitch deck before. I had never structured convertible debt or contracts for that kind of stuff. So yeah, there was a process. We had some people who mentored us on the raising and pitching side, and at the very beginning, and that kind of helped us go from like having nothing to having something. But we've also had to refine the pitch deck probably over 100 times now over the past year. So yeah, I would say, if you can bootstrap, obviously that's ideal. You're not giving away pieces of your company, but also there's times when like, okay, market conditions or whatever, I have to move fast. I have to be able to get this out because somebody else is going to beat me. And at those situations, if you don't have your own resources, then you kind of have to do a raise, right? And that's kind of where we are. My co-founder and I, we know we're not wealthy individuals, so we didn't have the option to just fund it ourselves, right? So that's why we had to raise.
I totally understand on this because starting a company or starting a product line is actually pretty hard. I don't think a lot of people think about the economics of doing it.
Hmm.
And the thing behind of it is that raising money on its own is even a process, but you can always think about it in a way like if this breaks profit and it's still making more money, you can always buy your shares back at a certain stage.
Yes, yeah, and we're kind of structured that we with the angels we could do that if we wanted to. If we can pay them out with some like we have like an interest structure. So like if we decide to pay them out, we can do that, or they can convert to equity if we can't. So
But you mentioned that you built Searchcraft first as like a side project for around 2 years, and then you decided, like, okay, I want to go all in, which internally you used at your agency, and then you spun it into a product. What was the transition and the challenges that when moving from, let's say, a client-focused work to, let's say, a product development work? I think a lot of people have this like shift of changing from, let's say, an agency style dealing with a bunch of clients with a bunch of products to working on one thing. And then all of a sudden it's like things are less cluttered or less chaotic or more organized, if you want to say.
yeah, so I spent the last 12 years doing software consulting, and my co-founder, that's kind of like his entire background was in software consulting. So there's like the dream of like, hey, what if we built our own product and had full control over our destiny? And then there's the reality of like, how does that translate to how we operate and how we work day to day? So sometimes the reality of the situation is difficult for people to make that transition. So, our whole team that we brought over from the agency, the people that did come over with us, some of them weren't able to kind of make that shift because like you're working for a startup, it's a different mindset. It's not like, okay, well, I'm here 9 to 5. I'm kind of like we're working all the time kind of thing. And that crunch of trying to ship is definitely a thing. We set deadlines for ourselves, and it's important to meet those deadlines. Like we made a goal to get into the market with our beta in 3 months after getting funding, and we had promises that we made to our investors, and we were able to do that. But some people on the team definitely have, they didn't, they thought it would be one thing and it wasn't for them. But it's yeah, it's definitely difficult to do, and I think there's a reason why a lot of agencies can't make that transition to being a product company, because it's a total different beast. And the financial fundraising part of it as well, that takes up a lot of time for founders. having relationships with investors and meeting new investors and writing pitch decks and things like that. So you have to do a whole lot of other things outside of just building, which when you're working at an agency model, you're just focused on the building part, not the company building, right? You're focused on building a product, but not necessarily focused on building the company and going to market, getting customers and all of that. So the whole go to market and customers relationships and all of that, that's all new to us. And we've been having to, learn some lessons along the way.
The the idea that of people thinking that working at a startup is not safe, or because they want to have this like safety net, if you want to say working in an agency, a
Hmm.
small disclaimer is that a client can cancel a deal and all of a sudden you can just get shut off. So for anyone who's actually thinking that if I work at a startup, my chances of me being in a secure position decreases, I'm just going to come up and tell you could be in the same agency and lose a shit ton of clients and be in the same position. So don't think that both sides are maybe secure altogether.
Yeah, I mean the rewards and the risks they are similar. They're also different. I mean, there are some months at the agency where we're like, okay, well, we don't have another contract lined up after this month, so we're going to either have to burn through bank account or cut the team. So it's the same thing. It's just people sometimes don't think about it, but yeah, those clients can go away, especially if you're doing like short term. Like we're working on a project for 3 months and then we have to line something else up. And that's happened before. But I would say from the reward perspective is while it's a lot of work to build a startup, you're kind of banking away value into your company, right? You know that like everyone at the company owns a piece of it, unlike client work where you build something and you just hand it back and then they go off into the world and they own the value. With the startup, you're building value into yourself and your company. So while there's a lot of risk, that you do have that value that you're putting away.
It's the when you talked about the value, which is the craftsmanship of building the software itself, or if you want to say in the agency, you might bullshit some things a little bit. You can just pass around with it, but when you're working on a product, you can't do that at all. But now
Yeah. So
with
like if we're talking about like technical debt, right? So like I know, okay, I have a month. We have to get this project out the door for this client. We'll build it and it'll meet the specifications, but don't look under the hood, right? Like, I mean, we try not to do things like that, but sometimes you have to cut corners to get things out the door, right? But if you own it, it's like, yeah, you can do that, but you're just hurting yourself in the long run, right?
you're gonna shoot yourself in the foot, if you want to say.
Yeah, totally.
Like the worst case, if I want to say it, if you're working with a client and you did the thing that you have to do, the worst thing that can happen is like you can just offset the contract itself or the project, and you still can keep moving a little bit and you learn from it. But when you're working on a product line, if you shoot yourself in the foot, you're gonna stay your foot shot all the way through the end, and it might
Hmm.
actually cause the product to stop altogether.
Right. And I mean, as an agency, like building for clients, you don't typically want to cut corners because you're not shooting yourself in the foot from a product perspective, but maybe you're shooting yourself in the foot relationship and reputation wise. And they're not going to come back to you if they dig into it and they're like, oh, this code is like not great, right? Like they built it in a way that's not maintainable. That's damaging to your reputation as an agency. And for myself at agencies, all of our customers were like word of mouth and referrals, right? So that reputation is very important. Just depends on how you want to shoot yourself in the foot.
But now with AI making workflows faster and sometimes even easier, this whole bullshitting and thing to do things a bit faster is becoming less. Like all of a sudden you can just tell it, do all of this, make no mistakes, and all of a sudden you have a full-on fledged product. Do you think like when we got introduced to these AI workflows and these tools that we start to lose some of the passion and the craftsmanship of building good software. Like at the end, like we just can build this and all this, and this AI can build it for us in the best way possible. There's no need for me to think anymore. What's your view on this, if you want to talk?
I mean, I think so. The nature of work is definitely shifting, but the AI still, you have to tell it what to do, right? That decision making comes from a human instead of maybe writing all of the code yourself. A portion of that is going to get written by AI, but you're still responsible for like defining, okay, this is how I want my application stack to be structured. I want to use these libraries. I want to have this architecture methodology or this data store. Hopefully you're still reviewing that code and looking through it and having an understanding about it. If you don't have an understanding about your code, I think that's a big problem. So, and I think that's where experience still plays a big factor. So you might not be typing every line of code yourself anymore, but you're still at the end of the day responsible for what is getting put into the world. So I would hope that people aren't just blindly shipping to production without, kind of having an understanding and knowing what's happening underneath the hood.
I hate to break it to you, but that's actually a reality.
Yeah, that's why I have some friends who are like, they're starting security companies like, MCP security companies or AI security companies now because of this. So
Yeah, the amount of profit that got generated from vibe coding is absolutely insane. If you want to ask me, like, there's a new business model on top of this existing business model nowadays.
I think a whole classification of businesses are going to go away because of the whole, quote unquote vibe coding. A lot of times you would pay an agency to build like an MVP of a product, right? You have a non-technical founder who has an idea for a product. And I feel like now with these tools, you can get a lot further than you could before. Like you can actually put your idea out there without spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on developers. So it's, software changes and developers just need to learn how to work in the new reality of the world and shift their skills towards, where they're still providing value.
And speaking of providing value, as someone who's led multiple teams as CTO, in your perspective, what is the definition of a CTO? How do you approach mentoring teams? And what about making high value and high stake business and technical decisions when being a CTO?
Yeah, so you're kind of you're responsible for the engineering culture of your company. You're responsible for not only how you see your team members interacting with each other, but also like the standards you set yourself up for as an organization itself. So like everything down to like, okay, this is like the etiquette for how we construct pull requests and how we choose to have conversations around building features. Like, do we have like an RFC culture where we have a lot of discussion about a technical problem before we build? I like to allow developers to have the space to have a lot of freedom in their decisions, but you also couple that with like, okay, what is best for the organization, and does this path make sense? I have a big passion for mentoring developers. I always have. And it's something that's it's kind of like building products, right? Like helping people build their careers and learning about how to pull in quality into their software engineering. It's very important because a lot of if you're new, um, maybe like, okay, I know TypeScript very well, but I don't know necessarily how to ship a production quality application from end to end, right? Like I don't understand the impacts of how I structure my database and what bottlenecks that could like impact down the road when we're trying to grow from 100 users to 1 million users, right? Like the way you structure your database can affect that. Just, being able to share that knowledge with younger team members. So that's a real big passion of mine.
Also, one of the hardest things is to try to make the developer, when you're trying to mentoring him, to take less egocentric decisions
Mhm.
and to actually become a more competent person, which is something you can't earn only through experience and time?
Yeah, so we internally we like to use RFCs. I encourage people on the team to like, okay, well, we have this big feature. Like, put down your thoughts before you write any code. Let's put it down and then let's discuss it. Right? Let's talk about it as a team. And a lot of times through those discussions, things will come up where like, oh, I didn't think about the impact from this perspective, or I missed this, or maybe this other person's idea is actually a better approach, right? And so, like you said, like people have to learn to let go and to not have egos about it, and that's a difficult lesson to learn for some people, especially so there's a reputation. Maybe developers aren't always the best communicators, right? But communication is very important.
And do you think the when a company comes up and sets the kind of goals for, or let's say objectives to a certain employee, and they're like, no, I don't want to do them, but even though they are business centric things, how do you tackle this inside of a team? So let me give a small role play. Let's say I'm the new employee. You set up to me, let's say, to these objectives. And I'll come up and tell you, like, I don't want to do these objectives. Maybe these don't define me, or I don't see things in this way. How do you approach this? Because we see this a lot actually in companies.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important to like. So I'm a big proponent for like one-on-one meetings with people on my team where they can speak to me privately, and we work together to kind of define the goals. Like, these are the goals that you want to do over the next couple weeks, the next quarter, and the next year. But I always put it into I bring ideas to the table, but I also put it into the hands of the developer to define like how they see their role at the company and what goals they want to do. And I find that, if they put the thought into it and think about it, then it's they have a lot of control over their own destiny. I kind of offer two different paths for developers as far as like their career trajectory goes within the company. There's like a management kind of path and the individual contributor path. We're not the only company that does this. It's very common in the tech industry to have kind of these two paths for developers. So because some people, they don't want to ever manage people. That's just not a passion for them to manage people. And so an engineering manager role is probably not the right fit for them. Some people just want to be able to progress into like an architect or principal engineer role. And that's how they still want to be very much hands-on in the code. So I think it's valuable to offer kind of both of those paths, right?
Yeah, we have this at where I work where if you want to continue after being, let's say, a senior, you can switch towards being a DevOps engineer, and then you can go towards being a solution architect in details. Since I work with an AWS Premier partner, so we have a lot of stuff that has to be done on the cloud, much more than just only development. But before, when I first started joining, we didn't have this like path until like recently. We were like, yeah, you can shift to a different industry. I was like, wait, I can do that? It's like, is that an option? It's like, can I really like do a shift? It's like, yeah, we're just like, if you wanted to do a shift internally, you can always do that. But this is like more visible in like, let's say, corporate companies where you can switch teams and you can switch positions, but not like when you're working at, say, a smaller company or agencies or any of those kind of levels.
Right. I mean, it's kind of dependent on the size of the organization. There may not be a place for you to go once you've reached a certain level if the organization is smaller. I've seen that. Like, obviously, if you have like like a 5-person team, maybe there isn't a need for like an engineering manager, a dedicated engineering manager, right? But at larger organizations, that is very much needed. Also, it depends on the organization culture. So, like, I worked at like a 10,000-person company in my past, and for them, they didn't really have like the dual path kind of mechanism. They expected you to become a people manager and to like, okay, well, if you want to progress, then you need to solely be engineering management where you're just in meetings, you don't touch code and all of that. I had that path for a bit, but I prefer to still be hands-on and code all the time, right? So that's like I kind of I'm fine with doing both, but yeah, that's why I think it's important for companies to kind of offer multiple paths for people.
Have you ever read Paul Graham's Maker Manager Scheduled? It's
I have not read that one. No.
you haven't read this one. So there's an explanation about what you've said about being a manager versus being a builder. So being a manager, all the time you have meetings back and forth, whereas being a builder, you have to dedicate, let's say, a 4 hour block at least to do the things that you have to do on a technical level. And people start to identify themselves as either as managers or makers. So the distinction between, let's say, I don't want to manage people, so I'm a builder, I'm a maker, versus being like, to say, okay, I don't want to write any much code, I might identify myself as a manager. It's an interesting read if you want to dive into it.
Check it out. Yeah, I've read a lot of like I guess engineering management books, but I haven't read that one.
And as someone who spent time in different companies before launching Searchcraft, how do you know when it's the right time to like leave something and take on a new challenge in your career?
I think you'll like listen to your gut because you'll know like if you feel like something is not challenging to you anymore, you're gonna lose that passion for being there, right? Or for working on that product or being at that company. I think it's important to take risks and to always constantly like push yourself. Some people are, they don't have that drive to do that. They get comfortable at a place and that's fine. But I think if you want to grow and progress your career, it's important to always feel challenged. So for me, like writing code and the engineering practices are like I have a really good understanding of what is needed to do that. That's not particularly like the most challenging for me. For me, the challenging part is like building a company right now, right? Raising capital, going to market, acquiring customers are all things that I don't have as much experience in because I've been a builder at other companies, right? So that's the challenging part for me right now. And that's what I'm excited about is taking on those challenges. And I think for anyone who works at a company, it's like, well, if you're not challenging yourself and you feel like that you're not excited every day in what you're facing, then that's a good indication that like, okay, I need to find the next thing probably.
But what defines, let's say I want to move towards the next thing and it's not that different from what you're currently doing? Because sometimes you will be faced with this.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just like owning more parts of the problem or expanding your responsibilities within the organization, right? So like, let's say I I'm used to building applications, but maybe I don't know any of the DevOps pieces, right? Like learning how to write infrastructure as code is a good progression from there. Some companies have the flexibility to allow people to do that. Some don't. It just depends on the organization. I like working at smaller places where people can kind of define their own role, and if they want to like learn more things, they can. So I think that's a good mindset for companies to have is to allow that organic flexibility where someone could decide, hey, I want to learn more about like infrastructure and DevOps. Let me do that, right? Like even though that's not my title, or I want to learn more about back end, even though I'm mostly been writing like React components or whatever, right? So I would say let that curiosity to drive you to see where you want to go.
And you can always do them. Let's say if you can't do it at the core that you're currently doing, just do it outside. You can, or do it on your own. Like that's my philosophy around it. It's like
Hmm.
if I want to do something, let's say completely different or weird, is like I would rather take a project outside of where I work and try to tackle it, even if it's, let's say, a side project or an actual project with an actual client. To me, I was like, I'm not gonna just sit down and just like not gonna do anything. It's like I'll take this case, learn from it, see what's missing, and try to fix things all together, just so I can have a set of experience. Some people might want to do that, some people don't want to do that. So depends on how
Hmm.
their view on the world.
Yeah, I mean, so I always build stuff outside of what I'm building day to day. So like that's kind of my playground to learn things. I before we started building Searchcraft, I hadn't had a whole lot of experience in Rust. I started teaching myself that on the side and building little backend APIs and tools, and now I write Rust full time. But for someone who's like, okay, I work in this language all day long. You want to learn another language? Build a little project on the side. I think it's great for learning.
I always end the podcast with a mental health question, which is, have you ever faced burnout or imposter syndrome? And if you did, what do you do to resolve these issues?
Yeah, I've faced both, and those are legitimate concerns. I think anyone who hasn't had that like imposter syndrome, just they haven't faced reality yet, because it will happen at some point in your career. You just have to have faith in your abilities, and I would say always keep learning. If you feel like you're not strong in an area or you're just kind of faking your way through it, like you can get there by just but the act of doing it and through teaching yourself. For now, like that's a thing too. Sometimes you just have to. It's gonna sound funny coming from me, being a startup, but sometimes you have to set boundaries for yourself, right? Like knowing have a quality of life balance, and you got to think about it as like this is a career is a marathon. It's not a sprint, so you have to set up boundaries for yourself to make sure you're able to kind of like do this long term. That being said, I work a lot right now because I'm in an early startup, but at some point it will be that way, right? Hopefully. But yeah, you got
And
to make sure you take time for your hobbies and for your family and your friends, and it's difficult to find that balance, but it's important to not let yourself get burned out.
to me, I was like, I started putting locks on social media so I don't see anything anymore. It's like you see a lot of interesting people. It's like all of a sudden you flip this person. I bought my new, let's say, this high exotic car. Then all of a sudden I bought my own house. It's like, okay, I'm gonna switch this off. I'm gonna go back to reality and enjoy my life a little bit because I think a lot of people face burnout. Even I face burnout and imposter syndrome. I think it's more like a comparison where you want to be versus where you currently are. And as you said, it's a long marathon. So a lot of people wish to be in a certain position, but they don't realize how much time it takes. So they think like, if I don't do it in a short period of time, then I'm a failure or I'm not doing well or I'm not doing right and all of those kind of things. But ironically enough, you might be doing very well. You just need to turn off the phone and just enjoy life.
Yeah, I mean, don't compare yourself to other people. That's the recipe for a disaster. Like social media, I hope most people understand it's like it's a facade, right? People aren't posting about all the difficulties most of the time. They're posting about like, look at me, I'm on vacation, or I'm at the beach, or yeah, I have my new car, or whatever. But they're not posting about like, oh, I worked 22 hours today, or whatever. I actually have a set screen time for myself as an adult because I don't want to be on social media more than I have to.